Topping today's news, the immigration minister reacts to criticism over granting citizenship documents at a funeral. The Prime Minister continues to apply pressure to the Grand Bahama Port Authority. The Prime Minister also sets the record straight in relation to work permit applications and a local businessman charged with importing guns. Good evening, Bahamas. I'm Jarino Saunders. This is your JCN Evening News. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Minister of Labor and Immigration Keith Bell firing back at former Immigration Minister Brent Simonet and other critics who called for his resignation following his move to grant a Haitian woman and her 2 children citizenship during a funeral service over the weekend. Audio of Minister Bell at the funeral went viral on social media, sparking questions on the appropriateness of granting citizenship at a funeral. Minister Bell says it was the deceased's dying wish.
The fact of the matter is, any place that can be done any place. And as I indicated before, and you'd have seen in a note that I'd have sent, he would have called me while he was in the hospital. I was in Switzerland at the time. When I returned, he was being buried within the week on that Saturday. And so in those circumstances, he called me on his deathbed and said that if I would, he would want his wife sworn in as a citizen in his presence. Unfortunately, he died before I got back from Switzerland.
Minister Bell says Mr. Simonet, who is the former Deputy Prime Minister, has no moral authority to speak to him on this matter.
Invite Brent Simonet to examine his own record before he could point fingers. Here it is, we're talking about someone who introduced a Commercial Enterprises Act to allow persons in this country to bypass every process to obtain status in this country. We are talking about someone who had to resign on 2 occasions from the cabinet of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so his own record ought to be examined before he could point fingers at anyone. In my view, he has no moral authority to speak to me on this matter.
He goes on to reiterate that the family had a right to citizenship and cabinet had already approved the spouse and the children for citizenship before the husband's passing.
He has 2 children who were born in the Bahamas, and he has a wife. And the spouses of Bahamians are entitled to citizenship under our Constitution. The same applies to children born in the Bahamas. And you would take note of the recent Privy Council decision which affirmed that position, that the children who are born in the Bahamas through Bahamian man are entitled to citizenship. As it relates to my action, I would say this. Frank, the deceased, he was an honorable individual. He served this country with distinction for a significant number of years. And I think that it was shameful and disgraceful the way in which certain personalities have sought to portray this. This issuance of a certificate of citizenship in this country is not the beginning of a process. It is the end.
Minister Bell says the spouse of the deceased has received death threats. He asks that all right-thinking Bahamians allow the family of the deceased to mourn the passing of their loved one in peace. After generating much commentary during his 2022, 2023, 2024 budget communication on May 31st, when he boldly stated that his administration will take decisive action on the Grand Bahama Port Authority in relation to the failing Freeport economy, Prime Minister Philip Davis, while wrapping up the budget debate on Monday, went even further, saying that for many years people have called for changes in the way the city of Freeport is managed, as it is the economic engine for Grand Bahama. He says the government has done its best to assist, but the Grand Bahama Port Authority needs to do more.
Grand Bahama lost 9% of its GDP last year and is continuing to lose more. Our position is clear. The Port Authority, under its present structure, is not realizing Freeport's enormous potential. The status quo is not working, and the people of Grand Bahama deserves better.
The Prime Minister noted that there is a provision in the Hawksbill Creek Agreement that specifies the cost borne by the government for certain activities and services provided to the city of Freeport are to be reimbursed by the Grand Bahama Port Authority.
Specifically, that's Section 1, Subclause 5 of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. My government has begun to invoice the Port Authority for these reimbursable expenses as calculated by an independent accountancy firm. To date, the Port Authority has not provided reimbursement in connection with any of these invoices. We need to have a serious conversation in this country about the best way forward. I'm of the belief that the Grand Bahama Port Authority needs a management and governance change in order to realize real growth and opportunities in Grand Bahama.
Prime Minister Davis says over the years it is the government that has been doing the work of the Port Authority by attracting investors and investing into Freeport, which brings into question the relevance of the Port Authority. He says the government is committed to consulting with residents of Freeport and the wider Grand Bahama, as well as with licensees of Freeport, to determine their outlook and views on the way forward. Work permit fees to be increased as the Davis administration has set up an immigration levy fund. As he wrapped up debate on his administration's fiscal plans for the 2023-2024 period, Prime Minister Philip Davis, who is the Minister of Finance, said there will be an increase in work permit fees which will go towards funding immigration enforcement, national health and wellness, and educational programs. This, as the Prime Minister says, he has instructed the Department of Labor and Immigration to deny work permit renewals for foreign workers holding positions that qualified Bahamians living in the country or internationally can fill.
We accept
commercial enterprises are.
We accept that in some instances, look, we understand it. This is not anti-foreigners. We just pro-Bahamian. That's right. And we accept that foreigners are required to fill some positions. And we accept that if a foreigner invests, that they may want their key personnel here. But we can't do it at the sacrifice of us, man.
No.
Right? And we want them to come because we appreciate as well that we may not have the capacity or the expertise and experience locally to provide some of them. In those instances, fine. But we also want them to pass it down.
Yes.
See, I want to make it clear.
All right.
I want to make it clear to employers that in these instances, we expect a Bahamian to understand, to understudy, and be trained for that position.
Those who employ foreign workers, according to Prime Minister Philip Davis, should not be requesting renewal of work permits after 10 to 15 years.
This is unacceptable, especially when our database at the Department of Immigration and at the Department of Labor shows that Bahamians are qualified to fill the post. I've asked the Department of Labor to hold these employees accountable and asked the Department of Immigration to deny renewal applications where we have suitably qualified Bahamians living here or abroad.
That's right.
Because enough is enough.
Yes.
Bring them on. And I'll say no more. Word to the wise is sufficient.
As for training and those who understudy, the Prime Minister notes that a great example of such a partnership is in the hotel sector with culinary and hospitality bridging programs at the University of the Bahamas. As parliamentarians went late into the evening wrapping up debate on the new fiscal budget on Monday, Leader of the official opposition, Michael Pintard, who reminded the government how when in opposition they were very critical of the Minister administration's handling of the Grand Lucayan Resort in Freeport and the F&M's inability to secure a buyer between 2019 and 2021. Mr. Pintard asked the Minister of Tourism, Investments and Aviation, Chester Cooper, for a breakdown on the amount of money spent by the Davis administration to maintain the vacant Grand Lucayan Hotel. Mr. Cooper shared the following details. In May of 2022, the Davis administration announced that it reached an agreement to sell the resort to Electra America Hospitality Limited for $100 million, but that deal fell through in November of 2022, reportedly due to a number of factors, chief among them a lack of international airlift into Grand Bahama. Since then, the government has been in search of a new buyer for the Grand Lucayan Resort. And finally, in this segment, news from the courts. 42-year-old businessman Rolando Thomas appeared before Chief Magistrate Joyanne Ferguson Pratt, that was on Monday, charged with a laundry list of illegal firearm and ammunition offenses, including possession of ammunition with the intent to supply, conspiracy to import ammunition, conspiracy to import firearms, possession of firearms with the intent to supply, importation of firearms into the Bahamas, importation of prohibited or restricted goods, and the possession of uncustomed goods. The charges come after police found 10 guns and 104 rounds of ammunition at his courier company. Prosecutors allege that Mr. Thomas illegally imported the weapons. He pleaded not guilty to the charges. Prior to this, the defendant had no previous history, according to his attorney, Bjorn Ferguson, who told the court that Mr. Thomas is a fit candidate for bail. The matter was adjourned until today for a bail hearing. Mr. Thomas was granted $30,000 bail with two suretors and is required to sign into the East Street South Police Station on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Fridays. He returns to court on July 24th. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back after these commercials.